In this video, in our series about how to play Reality's Edge, we are going to discuss combat. There are three types of combat: ranged, close, and hacking. Hacking will get its own video, so let's start with ranged combat. A ranged combat attack costs 1 action point, and you can conduct a ranged attack against any model you can establish line of sight to. Now, every model has a 360-degree view unless you are on Overwatch, an action that we'll get into in its own video. It is important to remember that you can only make one ranged attack action per turn unless there is some special ability, rule, or piece of equipment that gives you an exception. The stat you're going to use for ranged attacks is your model's aim. So your model must make an aim test, so you'll roll a 10-sided die, add any modifiers, and see if you were able to score higher than the target number 10. This only indicates if you hit the model. Damage and hit point loss are only determined once initiative switches to your opponent or if all models are done. We discussed this in a previous video. This table shows the types of modifiers you will have. Now, all these modifiers stack or are cumulative, except for terrain modifiers. You only get to count a terrain modifier once, so you have to shoot someone behind light cover and hard cover. You will only count the hard cover modifier. The ranged combat section does not have a rule that says you can't shoot while in base to base or while prone. So if you want to go belly down to make yourself small and shoot at someone, or walk up to a model and do a shotgun to the face, feel free. Let's talk more about making multiple shots. If a model has a weapon with the keyword burst, see page 127 of the rulebook, that weapon is an automatic. It allows you to do as many ranged attack actions as your model wants. But if it spends all of the attack actions it has on ranged attacks, it gets to make an additional attack action. So, if you get 2 action points in a turn and spend them all on firing your burst weapon, you get to make a 3rd ranged attack action for free. Now, if you are armed with an automatic weapon and you want to shoot at more than one target, you can. You must first pick a primary target and then create a 3-inch imaginary bubble around it. Any model within that 3-inch bubble can be hit. So if you target this individual, these are within the 3 inches of it. However, the rulebook says you must do something that it likes to call walk the fire. So, the first one that must be shot is the closest one, then this one, then the furthest one. And remember, at all times, friendly and enemy models can block line of sight. So it creates a cover situation. However, you cannot get a situation of where you fire at this one, skip this one, and then shoot at this one. When you walk the fire, you have to hit them all in a row. Now that we've talked about shooting, let's talk about cover and terrain. Now, in a previous video, we talked about the attributes of light cover and heavy cover. Light cover obscures a model, but is so soft it won't stop a bullet. So tall grass, wooden fences, hiding inside a koi pond. Now, hard cover obscures a model and can stop a bullet. So metal barricades, brick walls, boulders, or automobiles. Now, the rule book specifically calls out the situation that if you have models doing close quarter battle inside a building, they can both claim light cover. Now, the rules specifically state that a model's base only has to touch a piece of terrain, not be wholly inside of it to be considered to have that terrain's protection. Of course, if it does, it suffers the penalties to movement for being in that terrain. Now, does this mean that if the model just touches a building or something that's heavy cover, for example this one, it'll get heavy cover even in the following situation? A strict reading of the rulebook states this is heavy cover, its base is in contact. I will offer the word-twisting argument that this does not count as being in hard cover. However, for things like light cover, such as piles of garbage, This makes sense since we're actually abstracting a three-dimensional object and stating that maybe it's just rolling around in the piles of trash and find something that can block a bullet. But this is something that your gaming club will have to argue about yourselves. But I think the author meant intervening terrain. Now, this does bring up the subject of intervening terrain. So a player can benefit from cover even if they are not in base-to-base contact with that cover. So it still obscures the shot. The way this works is that you take a ruler, you place it down, you draw a line from the attacking model to the target model, and if the cover is closer to the model being shot, that model will get the terrain bonus. However, if the terrain cover is farther away from the target, it will not get the terrain modifier. Now let's talk about a special situation on page 40 called shooting through walls. Now this allows you to make shots against targets that you do not have line of sight to. Now this normally requires some special piece of equipment, such as a high-end grenade, that allows you to sense and detect the object and then fire at it. So this will apply even if the target is totally blocked, as in our example here. However, this is limited to a single piece of linear terrain, so you can't make a shot through two walls stacked to each other, or say a wall with a piece of hard cover that the model's completely obscured by. So when you shoot through a wall, the target model obviously counts as being in hard cover. However, if the attack hits, it suffers a -2 strength and does one less point of damage than it normally would. An interesting shooting rule that you can do in this game is called suppressive fire. So your model can fire wildly at a space without the intent of actually hitting and wounding someone. The intent of this is to either pin someone, keep their heads down, or say you want to disperse a crowd, you can just fire a bunch of shots over their head. So if you want to attempt suppressive fire, you have to declare before you make the shot that you're going to do a suppressive fire attack. You do your aim test, but in this case, since you're not really worried about hitting anything, you get a +3 firing bonus when making your 2-hit roll. If you actually do make a hit, it's not actually considered a wound, but a graze, which we'll talk about later, with an additional -2 penalty to that. Like I said, no wound roll. The exceptions are critical rolls. If you make a critical roll while doing suppressive fire, then you accidentally just shot the person you weren't trying to shoot. For these, you roll a wound roll instead of counting the hit as a graze. Like I said, sometimes when you're firing a bunch of shots into people, you get lucky or unlucky depending on the situation. So it should be noted that you cannot combine the suppressive fire action and the concentration action. So you can't combine the +3 and the +2. You don't concentrate when you're just firing wildly into the air. Another interesting thing about this is that you can fire at hidden targets. So in this example I have in front of you, if the target is hiding behind some trash bags and goes prone, remember the target is only as high as its base, then the shooter cannot see the target because the base is obscured. He does not have line of sight. However, he can fire a suppressive shots out there. The idea being that he's just randomly firing at the trash bags to suppress the target. This is called blind firing, which is allowed against hidden models. Now, this only applies if the model's within spotting range, and we'll have a separate video on what a spot is, but that's a pretty close range. But you do not need to make a spot test. So targeting hidden enemies follows all rules for suppressive fire, except the attacking model does not get the +3 bonus to shoot. Alright, so If he was out in the open, I'd get +3, but he's gone prone, he's hidden behind the trash bags, I don't get the +3. Now, all other firing modifiers will apply. If a hidden model is wounded by a critical during suppressive fire, they'll take a will test. If they fail that will test, they'll lose their hidden status. So in this example, he's hiding behind the trash bags, he gets shot, he makes a noise, pops up something, but he stops being hidden. So far, we've given examples of how to use ranged weapons that you pull a trigger and you fire. And we've talked about situations of where your target is at different ranges, you can't establish line of sight, is going prone behind cover. So what are you going to do? Well, flip to page 143 in your rulebook and look at the section called Using Grenades. They are considered a ranged weapon, they're just not included in the ranged combat section of this book. But they have a maximum 6-inch range. Now when you throw a grenade, you're not actually throwing at an individual, you're just throwing at a point in the board. This is what allows you to throw it over a wall and hit someone who's going prone and hiding under the wall. So if you throw a grenade, but you have failed a ranged attack, the grenade can deviate. That's why we talked about scatter dice in What You Need to Play This Game, the first video that we made. Now, a nice thing about grenades is that you can take as many as you want. They're not part of your normal weapon slot. They're considered extras. So if your operative buys 2 grenades, goes into a game, throws his grenades, and the game ends, the start of the next game, he has his 2 grenades back. Same thing if you have 3 grenades. So these are one-use items per gaming session, but they're really good at flushing people out from behind terrain. Now we'll discuss what to do after you successfully hit your target. It's time to determine if you actually wounded them. So what the attacker does is makes an opposed test. So the attacker rolls their d10, adds their strength stat to it. The defender rolls a d10 and adds their defense stat to it. High roll wins, ties go to the defender. Now it's time to determine how much damage. You take the strength of the weapon, divide by 2, and round up. So if the strength of the weapon is 9, divide it by 2, you get 4.5, round it up to 5. That's how much damage the model takes. Now let's talk about out of action. When your model hits 0 hit points, they go out of action. This does not mean you take it from the board, but you should probably do something to indicate that it is out of action, such as lay it down or put a token next to it. There are other types of things that will happen to your model that will take it out of action, such as being terrified, unconscious, or catatonic. Now there is a term removed from play. That's where you actually take the miniature and remove it from the board. Now let's talk about being grazed. If you're hit, but your model fails to go out of action, you've taken damage, but you're not dead yet. Or you're hit and it fails to wound, the model that's targeted must make a will test. Now, if you fail that will test, your model is scared and is going to want to find some cover and go prone. Now, if you fail your will test, you have to move 3 inches behind cover and then lay down. This means that it's going to cost you an action point next round if you want to stand up and make another move action. So you can see the implications here. Now, if there is no cover within the 3 inches, you can just go prone in place. Now, you don't actually have to make the will test. You could choose to voluntarily fail it if you want to be in that situation where you get a 3-inch move, which does not count as a move action, and go into cover. Thank you for joining us as we've discussed ranged combat in Reality's Edge. Please join us next time as we discuss close combat.